The whispers of the wedding guests turned to gasps as Harrison Thornton's cruel laughter echoed through the small church in Sweetwater Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1878. Harriet Dawson stood frozen at the altar, her ivory dress suddenly feeling too tight as her betrothed of 2 years publicly ridiculed her in front of the entire town. "Did you honestly believe I would marry you?" Harrison sneered, his polished boots clicking against the wooden floor as he circled her like a predator. A plain, penniless seamstress with nothing to offer but a decrepit family name. This whole engagement was merely a business arrangement to secure your father's land. Now that he's signed it over, what use do I have for you? Tears welled in Harriet's hazel eyes, but she refused to let them fall. At 22, she had given Harrison everything: her trust, her devotion, and now, it seemed, her dignity. The beautiful spring day that was supposed to mark the beginning of her new life had transformed into a nightmare. From the back of the church, a chair scraped against the floor. The crowd parted as Clayton Lawson stood, his tall frame commanding attention despite his modest attire. Unlike the other men in their Sunday best, Clayton wore what he always did: worn leather chaps over denim trousers, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up revealing sun-bronzed forearms, and a dusty Stetson clutched in his hands. "That's enough," Clayton's deep voice resonated through the stunned silence. His green eyes, normally warm and kind when he delivered mail throughout the territory, had hardened to emerald stone. "If you're too blind to see the treasure standing before you, then I'll be the groom she deserves." Harrison's face contorted with rage. "The mail carrier—" "You dare interrupt me, Lawson? Know your place?" Clayton stepped forward, placing himself between Harriet and Harrison. "My place is wherever decent folk need defending. Miss Dawson deserves better than your lies and mockery." Harriet's father, Edmund Dawson, rose shakily from his seat, his face ashen. "Harrison, we had an agreement. The deed to my land is already legally mine," Harrison finished with a smirk. "Signed and recorded at the county office yesterday. I have no further need for this charade." He gestured dismissively toward Harriet. Clayton's jaw tightened. "The agreement was predicated on a marriage that won't take place. Any decent judge would void such a contract based on deception." Murmurs rippled through the church as neighbors and friends began to realize the extent of Harrison's scheme. Harriet finally found her voice, though it trembled with emotion. "I may have been foolish enough to believe your promises, Harrison, but I am not without pride." She unpinned the modest pearl brooch from her collar, his only gift to her in 2 years of courtship, and dropped it at his feet. "Take the land if you must, but know that everyone in Sweetwater Creek now sees you for what you truly are." Harrison's face flushed red. "You'll regret this, all of you." He stormed down the aisle and out of the church, followed by his business associates. The silence that followed was deafening until Clayton cleared his throat. "Miss Dawson, I spoke out of turn." "I meant no disrespect, Mr. Lawson," Harriet interrupted, her composure returning despite the tears still threatening to spill. "Your words were the only honorable ones spoken in this church today." The wedding guests began to disperse, whispering among themselves. Harriet's mother, Elizabeth, came forward to wrap a protective arm around her daughter while glaring at her husband. "What have you done, Edmund?" she hissed. "Our home. I was trying to secure our future," Edmund replied defensively, though shame colored his features. "The drought has left us with nothing but the land itself. Harrison promised to make it profitable again." Clayton stepped forward. "Mr. Dawson, if you'll permit me, I'd like to speak with you and your family privately about this matter." Edmund nodded tiredly. "Our home is still ours until the end of the month at least. You're welcome to join us there." The Dawson home was a modest but well-maintained farmhouse 3 miles from town. As they sat around the kitchen table, Elizabeth served coffee while Harriet changed out of her wedding dress, returning in a simple blue calico dress, her dark blonde hair freed from its elaborate updo and now hanging in a simple braid over her shoulder. "I've been riding the mail route through these territories for 5 years now," Clayton began, his hat resting on his knee. "I've seen what's happening with the land disputes and water rights. Harrison Thornton has been buying up struggling homesteads all across the territory." Edmund's weathered face fell. "We've been fighting the drought for 3 years. When Harrison offered to marry Harriet and invest in irrigation for our land, it seemed like providence." "Except he never intended to marry me," Harriet said quietly. "He just needed my father's trust." Clayton nodded. "And he's not investing in irrigation. He's damming up Sweetwater Creek upstream to redirect water to his mining operations. That's why your wells have been running dry." Elizabeth gasped. "That's illegal. It's difficult to prove," Clayton replied. "But I carry more than just letters on my routes. I listen, I observe. 3 other families have lost their land to Thornton this year alone." Harriet studied Clayton with newfound interest. She had seen him regularly over the years, exchanging pleasantries when he delivered mail, but had never truly noticed the intelligence behind his eyes or the determined set of his jaw. "What can we do?" she asked. "The deed is signed." Clayton leaned forward. "The deed was obtained through fraudulent means. If we can prove Harrison never intended to fulfill his part of the arrangement, a judge might invalidate the transfer." Edmund shook his head. "Judge Parker is in Thornton's pocket. He'll never rule against him." "Then we don't go to Judge Parker," Clayton replied. "The territorial circuit judge, Judge Wilson, will be in Laramie next week. He's known for his fairness." Harriet felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. "I have letters from Harrison promising marriage. Would those help?" Clayton's eyes lit up. "They would indeed, but we'd need to prove he never intended to follow through, that it was all a ruse to get the land." "I might be able to help with that," Elizabeth said unexpectedly. "Martha Jenkins works as a housekeeper for Harrison. She's mentioned overhearing conversations, plans he's made that didn't include Harriet." For the first time since the disastrous wedding, Harriet allowed herself to smile. "Then we have a chance." Clayton nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "We do, but Harrison won't take this lying down. He's a dangerous man when crossed." "I'm not afraid," Harriet declared, though her hands trembled slightly around her coffee cup. "Perhaps you should be," Edmund cautioned. "The man has resources we can only dream of." Clayton's expression grew serious. "I won't let him harm any of you." "You have my word." The next morning, Clayton returned with his own wagon. "I thought you might need help gathering evidence," he explained as Harriet greeted him on the porch, "and I've arranged to speak with Martha Jenkins in town." Harriet nodded gratefully. "I've collected all the letters and documents I could find. Father is still searching through his desk." As they prepared to leave for town, the sound of approaching horses made them pause. 4 riders appeared on the horizon, Harrison Thornton leading them. "Get inside," Clayton instructed, reaching for the rifle he kept in his wagon. "No," Harriet replied firmly. "This is my home, I won't hide." Harrison dismounted, flanked by 3 men Harriet recognized as his business associates. "I see the mail carrier has appointed himself your protector," he called mockingly. "How touching." Clayton stepped forward, rifle held casually but ready. "State your business, Thornton. I've come to inspect my property," Harrison replied smoothly. "And to inform the Dawsons they have until tomorrow to vacate, not the end of the month as previously discussed. I have plans for this land that won't wait." Edmund emerged from the house, shotgun in hand. "The agreement was for the end of the month." Harrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I've changed the terms, unless, of course, Harriet reconsiders my proposal." "What proposal?" Harriet asked coldly. "You made it clear yesterday that marriage was never your intention." "Perhaps I was hasty," Harrison replied, his gaze calculating. "A business arrangement between us could still be beneficial." Clayton's grip tightened on his rifle. "Miss Dawson isn't interested in any arrangement with you." Harrison's face darkened. "This doesn't concern you, Lawson." "When you threaten good people on their own land, it concerns me," Clayton replied steadily. One of Harrison's men reached for his pistol, but Harrison held up a hand to stop him. "No need for that, not yet." He turned his attention back to Harriet. "Think carefully about your next move, my dear." You wouldn't want to find yourself homeless with nowhere to go. We're taking this matter to Judge Wilson, Harriet announced. The land transfer was fraudulent. Harrison's confident expression faltered momentarily before he regained his composure. Wilson won't be in Wyoming Territory for long. Accidents happen on the frontier. Judges are no exception. The threat hung in the air, unmistakable. Are you threatening a federal judge? Clayton asked, his voice dangerously calm. Harrison shrugged. Merely commenting on the dangers of frontier life. Good day to you all. He mounted his horse and led his men away, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. He's going to try to stop us from reaching Judge Wilson, Harriet said once they were gone. Clayton nodded grimly. Then we need to move quickly, and we need to warn the judge. In town, they split up Clayton to speak with Martha Jenkins while Harriet visited her friend Sarah at the telegraph office to send a warning to Judge Wilson. As she exited the telegraph office, Harriet spotted one of Harrison's men watching her from across the street. Fear prickled along her spine, but she straightened her shoulders and continued toward the general store where she was to meet Clayton. Inside, she found him in deep conversation with a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a worried expression. "Miss Dawson," Clayton said as she approached. "This is Martha Jenkins. She's agreed to help us." Martha glanced nervously toward the door. "I can't stay long. If Mr. Thornton discovers I'm speaking with you, I'll lose my position." "We understand," Harriet assured her. "Anything you can tell us would be helpful." Martha lowered her voice. "I overheard Mr. Thornton speaking with Mr. Reynolds, his business partner, the night before your wedding. He was laughing about how he'd never have to go through with the marriage now that the deed was signed. Said he had bigger plans that involved selling the combined properties to the railroad once he'd secured the water rights." Harriet's heart sank. "The railroad, that's why he's buying up all the land," Martha nodded. "The Northern Pacific is planning a new route. Mr. Thornton has inside information through his cousin who works for them. If he controls the water and the land, he stands to make a fortune." Clayton exchanged a significant look with Harriet. "That explains why he's so desperate to keep us from reaching Judge Wilson. This isn't just about your family's farm, it's about his entire scheme." "There's more," Martha continued. "He's hired men to prevent anyone from reaching Laramie before the judge moves on. I heard him giving instructions this morning." "When does the judge leave Laramie?" Harriet asked. 3 days from now," Clayton answered. "We need to leave today if we're going to make it." Harriet nodded decisively. "I'll go home and pack what we need." "You can't go back there alone," Clayton protested. "Harrison's men are watching." "I won't be alone," Harriet replied, gesturing toward the general store's owner, Ben Miller, who was approaching with his shotgun. "Ben's wife Ruth is my mother's closest friend. They'll help us." Ben nodded grimly. "Already got my boys keeping an eye on your parents, Miss Harriet. No harm will come to them while you're gone." "Thank you," Harriet said gratefully. "I'll return with Ruth in an hour." True to her word, Harriet returned with Ruth Miller, who had insisted on accompanying her. They found Clayton preparing his wagon, adding extra supplies and checking his weapons. "My parents are packing essentials," Harriet informed him. "They'll stay with the Millers until we return." Clayton looked up, concern evident in his eyes. "It's going to be dangerous. Harrison's men will be watching the main roads." "Then we won't take the main roads," Harriet replied simply. Clayton couldn't help but smile at her determination. "You continue to surprise me, Miss Dawson." "Harriet," she corrected him. "I think after you offered to marry me yesterday, you've earned the right to use my given name." A flush crept up Clayton's neck. "About that, I spoke impulsively." "I didn't mean to presume. You defended my honor when no one else would," Harriet interrupted softly. "I won't forget that, Clayton." They departed as dusk fell, taking a little-used trail that wound through the foothills rather than the main road to Laramie. Clayton drove the wagon while Harriet sat beside him, rifle across her lap. Her parents had tearfully embraced her before she left, extracting promises to be careful. "Have you always known how to use that?" Clayton asked, nodding toward the rifle. Harriet nodded. "Father taught me when I was 14, said a woman on the frontier needs to know how to protect herself." He was right, Clayton agreed, though I hope you won't need to use it. They traveled through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. By dawn, they had covered considerable ground, but they were still 2 days' ride from Laramie. We should rest during the day, Clayton suggested as they made camp in a sheltered grove. Less chance of being spotted. Harriet agreed, though sleep proved elusive as she contemplated the journey ahead. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were troubled by images of Harrison's mocking face at the altar. She awoke to Clayton gently shaking her shoulder. "Someone's coming," he whispered. Harriet grabbed her rifle and followed him to the edge of their campsite. Through the trees, they could see 3 riders approaching slowly, searching the ground for tracks. "Harrison's men," Clayton murmured. "They must have figured out which way we went." "What do we do?" Harriet whispered back. Clayton considered their options. "The horses are rested enough. If we move now, we might be able to stay ahead of them." They quickly broke camp, erasing all signs of their presence before slipping away through a narrow ravine that Clayton knew from his mail routes. The going was slow and difficult, but it kept them hidden from their pursuers. By nightfall, they emerged onto a high plateau with a clear view of the surrounding territory. In the distance, they could see the lights of a small settlement. Rivercross, Clayton identified it. "Small ranching community. I know the folks there. They'll help us." The ranch house belonged to the Wagner family, who welcomed them warmly despite the late hour. After explaining their situation, they were offered food, beds, and fresh horses for the morning. "Thornton's been causing trouble for ranchers all through this territory," Jacob Wagner explained as they sat around the kitchen table. "Damming streams, buying up water rights. We'd be happy to help anyone standing against him." Jacob's wife, Eliza, nodded in agreement. "Our son Thomas can guide you through Blackwater Pass tomorrow. It'll shave half a day off your journey to Laramie." Harriet felt overwhelmed by their kindness. "We can't thank you enough." "No thanks needed," Jacob replied firmly. "Out here we stand together or we fall alone." That night, as Harriet prepared for bed in the small guest room, a soft knock came at her door. She opened it to find Clayton standing there, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I wanted to make sure you were all right," he said. "Today was difficult." Harriet smiled tiredly. "I'm fine." "Thanks to you." Clayton shook his head. "You've shown more courage than many men I've known. I admire that about you." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Harriet felt something shift between them, a recognition of something that had perhaps been there longer than either had realized. "I've been thinking about what you said at the church," she said softly. "About being the groom I deserve." Clayton's green eyes widened. "I spoke without thinking. I never meant to take advantage of your situation. What if I told you I've noticed you for years?" Harriet admitted. "Waiting for your deliveries, looking forward to your stories about the places you'd seen." "I'd say I've been a fool not to notice," Clayton replied, his voice rough with emotion. "I've admired you from afar, Harriet Dawson, your kindness, your strength. But you were promised to another, and I'm just a mail carrier with little to offer." Harriet reached out to touch his hand. "You offer honesty and decency. That's worth more than all of Harrison's money and false promises." Clayton's fingers intertwined with hers. "When this is over, when your family's land is secure, I'd like to court you properly, if you'll allow it." "I'd like that very much," Harriet replied, her heart lighter than it had been in days. The morning brought clear skies and renewed determination. Thomas Wagner, a capable young man of 20, led them through Blackwater past a treacherous but direct route to Laramie that few travelers use due to its difficult terrain. "Thornton's men won't follow us here," Thomas assured them. "They'd need to know the pass, and not many do." By midday, they had traversed the most difficult section of the pass and were making good time. Harriet found herself watching Clayton as he skillfully guided the wagon over the rough terrain, appreciating his quiet competence and the way he checked on her well-being without being overbearing. They were within a half-day's ride of Laramie when disaster struck. A gunshot echoed through the canyon, startling the horses. The wagon lurched as one of the wheels hit a rock, nearly toppling over. "Get down!" Clayton shouted, pulling Harriet from the wagon seat just as another shot splintered the wood where she had been sitting. Thomas had already dismounted, rifle in hand. "There!" He pointed to a ridge where 2 riders were visible. Clayton returned fire, forcing the attackers to take cover. "They must have guessed our destination and circled around." "What do we do?" Harriet asked, crouched behind the wagon. "The horses can't pull the wagon through this terrain much longer anyway," Clayton decided. "Thomas, can you create a diversion while Harriet and I continue on horseback?" Thomas nodded grimly. "I'll lead them away from the pass. Meet you in Laramie." They quickly transferred their essential supplies and documents to saddlebags. Thomas mounted his horse and fired several shots toward the ridge before riding off in a different direction. As hoped, the attackers pursued him, giving Clayton and Harriet the chance to escape on the remaining horses. "Will he be all right?" Harriet asked worriedly as they galloped away. "Thomas knows these mountains better than anyone," Clayton reassured her. "He'll lose them and circle back to Rivercross." They rode hard through the afternoon, stopping only when the horses needed rest. As the sun began to set, the outskirts of Laramie finally came into view. "We made it," Harriet breathed, relief washing over her. Clayton smiled, though his expression remained vigilant. "Not quite yet. We still need to reach Judge Wilson." They rode directly to the courthouse, where they learned the judge was staying at the Laramie Hotel. As they approached the hotel, Harriet spotted a familiar figure emerging from the entrance, Harrison Thornton himself. "He's here," she whispered, tugging Clayton into a shadowed alleyway. Clayton's expression hardened. "He must have taken the main road." "We need to get to the judge before Harrison can interfere." They waited until Harrison walked away with another man, then hurried into the hotel. The clerk directed them to Judge Wilson's room, where they knocked urgently. The door opened to reveal a distinguished older man with silver hair and penetrating blue eyes. "Yes, what is the meaning of this late call, Judge Wilson?" Clayton began respectfully. "My name is Clayton Lawson. This is Miss Harriet Dawson. We've come to report fraud and corruption involving Harrison Thornton." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Thornton? He was just here attempting to convince me to leave early for Cheyenne, claimed there was an urgent case requiring my attention." "He was trying to prevent us from reaching you," Harriet explained. "He's fraudulently obtained my family's land and threatened anyone who might stand against him." Judge Wilson studied them carefully before stepping aside. "You'd better come in and tell me everything." For the next hour, they presented their evidence: Harrison's letters promising marriage, Martha Jenkins' signed statement, and documentation of similar cases throughout the territory. The judge listened attentively, asking occasional questions. "This is a serious matter," he said finally. "If what you say is true, Thornton has committed fraud, intimidation, and possibly conspiracy to interfere with federal duties." "It's all true, Your Honor," Harriet assured him. "We have witnesses prepared to testify." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "I'll issue an order freezing any transfer or development of the properties in question until a full hearing can be conducted. But be warned, men like Thornton don't surrender easily." As if to punctuate the judge's warning, shouting erupted from the street below. They rushed to the window to see Harrison confronting Thomas Wagner, who had apparently made it to Laramie after all. "We need to help him," Clayton said, already heading for the door. "Wait," Judge Wilson called, retrieving a document from his desk. "Take this, it's a temporary injunction. It won't stop bullets, but it carries the weight of federal law." They hurried downstairs and out into the street where Harrison was threatening Thomas with a pistol. "The judge has already heard our case, Harrison," Clayton announced, holding up the injunction. "It's over." Harrison turned, his face contorted with rage when he saw Harriet and Clayton. "Nothing is over until I say it is." He raised his pistol. Several things happened at once. Thomas tackled Harrison from behind. Clayton pushed Harriet to safety. A shot rang out, striking a post inches from where Clayton stood. Town deputies appeared, drawn by the commotion. Judge Wilson emerged from the hotel, his authoritative presence immediately commanding attention. "Arrest that man," the judge ordered, pointing to Harrison. "Attempted murder and interfering with federal proceedings, for starters." As the deputies restrained Harrison, he continued to shout threats and promises of revenge. But the people of Laramie, many of whom had suffered from his schemes, merely watched in satisfaction as he was led away. "It's really over," Harriet said in disbelief as Clayton helped her to her feet. "The hearing is set for tomorrow morning," Judge Wilson informed them. "I suggest you both get some rest. You've had quite a journey." The next morning, the courtroom was packed as Judge Wilson heard detailed testimony about Harrison's fraudulent land acquisitions. By noon, he had issued his ruling. All land transfers were to be reversed, and Harrison would face criminal charges for fraud and intimidation. As they left the courthouse, Harriet felt as though a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "We did it. My family won't lose their home," Clayton smiled, taking her hand in his. "Your courage made this possible. You never gave up." "Neither did you," she replied softly. "You stood by me when no one else would." They walked slowly toward the hotel where they would rest before beginning the journey home. The future suddenly seemed full of possibilities. "I meant what I said about courting you properly," Clayton said as they paused on the boardwalk. "Though I understand if you need time after everything that's happened." Harriet looked up at him, seeing the sincerity in his green eyes. "Some things don't need time, Clayton. Some things you just know." Standing on her tiptoes, she pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek, surprising them both with her boldness. Clayton's smile was radiant. "Then I suppose when we return to Sweetwater Creek, I'll have to speak with your father." "I believe you already did," Harriet reminded him with a laugh. "At the church when you offered to be the groom I deserve." "So I did," Clayton agreed, his eyes twinkling, "and I intend to keep that promise if you'll have me." "I will," Harriet replied simply. "Not today, perhaps, but soon." 1 year later, the small church in Sweetwater Creek was once again filled with wedding guests. But this time, as Harriet walked down the aisle in a simple white dress adorned with lace she had sewn herself, there was no mockery or deception waiting for her only Clayton, his eyes shining with love and promise. The Dawson farm had flourished under their combined efforts. Clayton had used his knowledge of the territory to help Edmond implement proper irrigation, and Harriet's small seamstress business had grown to supply stores in 3 counties. As they exchanged vows, Harriet couldn't help but reflect on how Harrison's cruelty had ultimately led her to true happiness. The mail carrier who had quietly delivered letters for years had become the man who delivered her from heartbreak to joy. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Clayton leaned down to whisper in her ear, "I told you I would be the groom you deserve. I intend to spend the rest of my life proving it." Harriet's answering smile was radiant. "You already have." Their kiss sealed a promise that had begun in a moment of courage and grown into a love strong enough to overcome whatever challenges the frontier might bring. As they walked back down the aisle together, Harriet Dawson knew with absolute certainty that she had found exactly where she belonged, not with a man who saw her as a means to an end, but with one who saw her true worth and cherished it above all else.